as well as being your division fire chief, I'm also the department's fire behavior analyst. So as a fire behavior analyst, I work at the local level, the state level, and the national level on things in regarding wildfire, from relative risk assessment to fire modeling to tactics to strategies to fire use and those type of fire effects type of issues. So this is one of the things I have a significant passion for. So I'll walk you through where we're at now as we go into the fall outlook and set the stage for what we're going to transition to. So just looking through September to December, we have one of our resources is Southern Operations, which is a unified approach with our state partners, federal partners, and local government to have relative risk on all things wildland fire. And so I am one of the contributors to that for looking at seasonality, climate change issues, how it's affecting the wildland fuels and what our relative risks are. So just the highlights is what the outlook is now on the weather is we're looking temperatures to be slightly or above normal through December. And remember, the above normal could be 3 degrees, it could be 5 degrees, or we can have days where it's 15 degrees above normal from now through December. We'll have rainfall that will be below normal through December, and there will be near normal amount of Santa Ana wind events through December, which we'll talk about here shortly. So just looking at our Santa Ana wind events days, and this is delivered to how we look at Ventura and Los Angeles County, that we know that we live in a wind dependent fire regime as we get into the fall months. That's because of those Santa Ana wind conditions. If you look starting in January and February, if you look at the blue line that goes vertically, in the months of January, we have the most significant amount of Santa Ana winds with the highest wind speeds to give us those critical elements, but yet we have short fire frequency under those type of wind conditions in January and February. And that's usually because we have accumulated 2 inches or more of rainfall that promotes the annual grass to carpet the landscape, if you will, which is a very significant fire suppressant in rapid fire growth because of spotting. Now, if you look at the far right, with October, November, and December is where we're at now. We know that we have routinely an absence of rainfall. We know that we have critical fuel conditions. We know that our Santa Ana wind conditions to promote the large fire growth, which is the main contributor to our risk in those, the Santa Monica Mountains, especially, or in Southern California, to promote that large fire growth. And the average number of moderate to strong Santa Ana winds that we have usually issues anywhere for those high risk days, averaging at about 8 per fall portion of the fire season. Next, please, Megan, if you wouldn't mind. So looking at where we're at with drought. So where we're at now, things are somewhat neutral. And the reason is neutral is because we know that we don't normally get rainfall starting from the first part of June until October-ish. And all of us can probably remember from living out here, sometimes you have rainy Halloweens and sometimes Santa Ana wind Halloweens. Mother Nature and how she turns on the sprinkler system and or turns on the fan, if you will, is each year it's positional. So we have to be responsive to that by the best forecasting and intelligence that we have. So we work closely with the National Weather Service, and we have conference calls with them every day to look at that relative risk. So rainfall is positioned to be delayed and below average September through December. The potential for average rainfall is yet to be determined from January to May, because we know our rainfall months, as we get into the later part of January through April, is when we accumulate a significant amount of rainfall, which is 14 inches on average for our area. So it's not the amount of rainfall necessarily, it's how it's delivered. I would rather have that 14 inches of rain delivered to us in March and April and extending into May, because then it gives us a longer residency time of those soil moistures to keep our vegetation out there in the wildlands very lush and green. So we have a chance of rain potential is favorable, but positioned to be below average. So right now, I hate to use 50-50 chance, but we will see how it turns out as we get into November, is when we start to see how our rainfall is set up and positioned as we get into our winter type of months. And right now we're in a 10-inch deficit within our area. However, that comes into play significantly as we saw going into June, July, and August. And now when we get to October, we're exactly where we should be, whether or not we got our above average rainfall, or if we got a banner year of rainfall over 14 to 15 inches, we still have those soil moistures that dried up. So actually, the good thing is we are where we would be regardless if we had 5 inches of rain or 15 inches of rain. Where we're at with the climatology in our fuel beds, they are at average at 60 or less is what is relatively normal for this time of year. So just looking at our drought, and this is the drought index, and it shows that Los Angeles County that you can see is in extreme drought. And that extreme drought, actually, unless we were to get late monsoon rains, it keeps us in this extreme drought. But however, this isn't an anomaly. We have this, it does happen time after time over the course of 100 years worth of climatology and data collected. So watershed fuel conditions. So the wildland fuels are very dynamic. We know in the springtime, we get rain, they begin to get green, and it looks beautiful throughout the Santa Monica Mountains in the spring. Summer and fall fuel conditions are highly supportive for fire start and spread, which is routine as we get into our fall months. And we measure our fuels every 2 weeks, and there's a live fuel, and that's all the native vegetation that you see throughout the hillsides and the landscape, that we go out and actually cut pieces of that vegetation and we weigh it. Then we cook all the water out of it, and then we weigh it again. And that's what gives us a representative value of how much water weight is being retained in a wildland fuel, or that native vegetation, if you will. So we look at different species. We go through the same process every 2 weeks to catalog what our live fuels are doing, because fuels, or the watershed that's out there, vegetation that's out there, different species react differently under different set of climatology and fuel moisture contents. We also measure the dead and down fuels. So the dead and down fuels are those fuels that are unattached to the living plant, if you will. It's what's on the forest floor. It's on what's in the wildland areas that is just, I guess the best way to put it, it's Mother Nature's sponge. So the thicker the material, or the larger diameter dead fuels, absorb moisture and release moisture based on sunlight, shading, precipitation, and dew point, which leads to that when water will form on a solid object at that dew point. So it is Mother Nature's sponge, and throughout the course of a day, or hours, if you will, within 10 hours or 100 hours, there's a time lag on how much that dead fuel that's lying within the wildlands either takes in or releases or dries up, if you will. So we measure that as well every day through some sophisticated remote automated weather stations that we have out there. So the lack of precipitation with forecasted weather and dead and live fuel ratios will be very supportive of large fire growth on Santa Ana wind days. Live fuels remain at a moisture range of 55 to 60% until late winter. And until late winter, as we get into the spring, is we know that we promulgate precipitation, and those wildland fuels are very smart, and that's why they're dynamic. They know in the winter time when we get our coldest temperatures, they just dose themselves with enough water to survive, because if they all of a sudden take in all this water and now we have freezing temperatures, it'll actually create mortality, if you will, or cause or have the potential for those live fuels to actually die because they freeze. So they're very smart and how they react going into winter and knowing when we're gonna go into spring. So with the annual grass that we have that is brown, that it's at there, that's the #1 contributor to large fire growth, because that's a receptive fuel with spotting in the embercress that gives us that exponential fire growth. And so without that green up, meaning without the promulgation of 2 inches of rain or better, we don't have a green grass carpet out there, which is a significant dampening for large fire growth. With the dry, dead fuels that we have there, we have the right combination on high wind days or high risk days, red flag days, to support large fire growth. And there's no surprise to us when they happen, because of the remote automated weather systems we have, because of the daily briefings that we have with the National Weather Service. And so right now there is currently no green up in any of our annual fuels to date, which is normal for this time of year. So this is what, since we really enhanced our program in 1981, and I'll just give you a quick overview on this chart, and it's an open source. You can go to our website, you can go to the portion of it, and Megan can send out a link to you where you can get it. This is something that we track. So if you look to the far left-hand column, it has a value of 40. It has a value of 60 that is delineated with a straight line and the dots. And I'll give you a representation of what that means here shortly. And it goes to 220. And those are actually the live fuel moistures based upon when we sample and what they look like that gives us this graph. So the darker line that you see, or the black line that you see, is what average is throughout the course of the years from 1981 to current. The blue line is how we tracked last year and what happened last year. And the red line is where we're at today. So you can see with Mother Nature turning off the sprinkler system and 10 inches of deficit in rain, you can see how that value dropped significantly below what average is. But if you look at the red circle, is where everything comes together, which is now normal for this time of year, because there hasn't been any soil saturation because of precipitation to moisten those fuels to get them to take in that moisture to stay lush and green. So everything that we're at is normal now with our wildland fuels this time of year. So looking at our risk, is we know that we had some smaller fires, and smaller fires can be just as challenging as large fires. The size of the incident doesn't necessarily equal the complexity of the fire. And so the red box, if you see, it ties in when our live fuel moistures get to 80. And then we extend it out through the first part of December before we project that we start getting a increase in those live fuels. Is we know when our live fuel moistures get to 80% or less, it gives us some vulnerabilities on routine days to support aggressive fire behavior that may be small in nature, but may have a rapid rate of spread under routine days with that type of fuel conditions that exist on routine days. Next, please. So the fire danger analysis. So annual grass is highly receptive in all areas with sunlight. So the sunlight, as you know, and I want you to think about if you're out and about and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at that you step out of your car and you don't have any shoes on and you step on the hot asphalt. Anything that receives sunlight will be significantly warmer than ambient air temperature, and temperature we measure in the shade. So what does this mean? That fuel being a reactive element, meaning fuels that don't have as much water weight to them, meaning you need less heat energy to drive out whatever water weight is within a wildland fuel. That fuel reacts to that because you need less fire intensity to promote heat energy to move fire across the landscape with that. So direct sunlight elevates fuel bed temperatures. So with those fuel bed temperatures that can be 140, 150 to 160 degrees in direct sunlight, you could have a 80-degree temperature day, and that's because of the sunlight. So that's why I give a representation to asphalt that you would step on a hot summer day and how hot that would be on your feet. The fuels react that same way because in the shade, you could have a 40, 50, 60, 70-degree temperature difference from a fully sunlit solid object compared to where temperature is measured in the shade. We know that our live fuel moistures, as you just saw, they're at a critical level. And what the critical level means, why do we call it critical, and what does 60% mean? 60% of that water weight takes, like I just mentioned, a less significant amount of heat energy to have fire growth to happen because it doesn't have the heat sink behind driving out the water out of it. So I'll give you another example. It would be like that if you're camping and you need to make a campfire. It is easier to start your campfire with small twigs and sticks that are dry rather than the same diameter twigs and sticks that are been rained on, that are wet, they didn't have any sunlight, they're in the shade. So there's a significant variable in the way fuels react based upon sun, shade, and their exposure to moisture. So looking at routine days, we have a moderate chance, and on those very hot, dry days that may not trigger a fire weather watch or a red flag issuance, we have a higher chance for or probability for initial attack fires on those routine days that we normally wouldn't see because of the state of the fuels. However, that is normal for this time of year. We have a low probability of large fires in the absence of wind. Well, I know I told you a lot of information that may seem not so favorable, but the favorable thing is, you know, like today, in the absence of wind, if you're within the Santa Monica Mountains or extending to the 101 corridor, you're sitting in Agora or somewhere close within the Santa Monica Mountains, if you looked outside now, you have a low chance of a large fire, and that large fire being something at 500 acres or greater. On a day like today, you have a very low chance of having a fire that even got over 10 acres. That's because of the relative humidity, how it reacts with those fine fuels, and there's no wind to push it across the landscape. And there's only two ways that fire moves across the landscape. And there's only two forms of energy that move fire across the landscape. It's either slope energy, which is if fire is established at the bottom of a drainage, it can run to the top of the ridge or to the mountaintop. Fire doesn't like to travel from the mountaintop to the valley bottom. It'll do it but it needs to be wind dependent for that to happen. The other force of energy that moves fire across the landscape is wind. And wind out here, as we know, is what our most challenging times are when we have those vulnerabilities based upon Santa Ana wind conditions. So what do we do to prepare? We identify those high-risk days in dry conditions, and we look at how strong the winds are going to be, what the direction they're coming from, and do we have a drier air mass for 12 to 24 hours to support a large fire growth day. And we are very good at that. And we may not be happy with the outcome of our fires, but we are prepared, and we know that we have high risk days based upon our daily fire danger analysis that we do 365 days a year. But it becomes more important to all of us when we know that we have abnormally warm or hot, dry, and windy conditions. So we use a matrix, if you will, on a burning index, which is a mathematical formula, if you will, that takes into account outside air temperature, relative humidity, the 2 o'clock in the afternoon peak sunlight time, if we've had any precipitation, and also the state of the 10-hour dead fuels, the 1-hour dead fuels, and it puts it into a formula and gives us a relative risk, so we know what average is, or we're below average or above average on that relative risk day. So there's quite a bit of science that goes into this too, but we always have to validate it every day. Next, please. So what is a threshold for a high risk day? We've learned a little bit about live fuel moistures. So we know on a high risk day that if we have live fuel moistures that are less than 75%, if we have those fine fuel moistures that are at 7% or less, we have our larger fuels, which is a 10-hour time lag fuel at 1/4 inch to 1 inch in diameter, which is abundant in old growth vegetation that's within the Santa Monica Mountains at 7% or less. And if we have targeted wind speeds of 35 miles per hour or greater, and then with all that good information we have, if it produces a burning index value of 120 or greater, we know we are in the category 4 supporting large fire growth. And that large fire growth on average is 8,000 acres or greater within the first 24 hours. So in closing, a high-risk day will need to have the combination of high winds and dry weather. Large-scale winds are routinely forecasted in the fall and winter months. High winds and large fire growth is dependent upon spotting ahead of the advancing fire front. The current state of the forecasted climatology will support spotting. And once again, that's because we don't have any green up from precipitation, which we look at the 2-inch mark. And then we look at 2 inches of rain, and 2 weeks later is when you usually get that nice green grass that's promoted throughout the wildlands. And we know that we have high winds, live fuel moistures below 60 will produce aggressive fire behavior on high risk days. And the combination of the two factors create an advancing fire front with significant spotting potential. Large fire days in the months of October through December have the potential of 10,000 plus acres and are associated with rainfall of 2 inches or less pre-fire start. So with that, hopefully I didn't overdose you too much with all my fire behaviorness. So I'll kick it back to Sarah to see how she wants to take on the next step of what we'd like to do.
Yes, so we already have a question. It's a rather specific one, so I'm going to give a brief moment before I read it. For anyone who does have a question, please type it in the chat, or you can use the raise your hand feature, and I will do my best to try and keep an order going of who wants to speak. When addressing Chief Smith, please try to keep it to a question format and less of a discussion. So this particular question is several parted.
Okay.
The first part is, When will the county begin removing excessive vegetation from properties that have failed to do their own
Brush
fire
clearance.
clearance and have been reported to the city of Malibu or LA County Fire?
Okay, so there's a process involved with that, and that is not a unique problem. We have, for the most part, significantly overwhelming good compliance within our areas. There is those that are challenged with clearing their brush and meeting the fire code requirements. So the process is we go out and inspect. And then if it's not in compliance, we give them 14 days to get it completed. And then we go out again and really be good neighbors and say, you really need to get this done before a certain date. We give them an extension. And then at that time, it gets turned over to our brush clearance unit, which is basically the clearinghouse for that. The brush clearance units works with county agriculture, and county agriculture puts them within the process that they did not meet the brush clearance requirements. And then it falls within Los Angeles County ag to then put on a time frame for them to go and clear the property and then bill them somehow, and I believe it's taxable somehow, to bill them for the work, the scope of work that was done. So the fire department does the inspection. The non-compliance then falls in with county ag, and then county ag is responsible for managing when that property gets cleared by either county ag or a contractor. They manage that component. It would be very nice if we had control over that, to where if we knew we had non-compliance, we could use our hand crews and then go through the process for us to do it. But that's not the case at this time. So I hope I answered your question.
So the second part of this question is what must be done or should be done on their part as a commercial property neighbor to get the removal done to protect the questioner's property and tenants?
Okay, so it all starts with, if there's a complaint that we need to identify, what everybody needs to understand is the city of Malibu, through the great efforts of the city and us, work together on this. So if we have a complaint, we go and look at what the complaint is, and we see if it is actually in compliance or out of compliance. We get a significant amount of phone calls to go and do inspections, and they're actually well within compliance. We do get those. So not every time we get a complaint is it something that needs to be acted upon. So what do you need to do? You need to talk to the city of Malibu. You can talk to Chris Broussard. We communicate all the time. In fact, I think he's employed by us half the time. He's doing so much work with us. It's great. So we will go out and look at it and assess what direction we need to take and where it needs to go to make sure that that person is in compliance, if that's the case.
Thank you. And then the final part of this question, I'm going to tweak it a little bit.
Okay.
Does the county keep a record of running non-compliant residences and businesses? And if so, if not, or if so, what can be done to protect the businesses and residences around them? So is there a record? How can those around them protect themselves?
Yes, there is records. In fact, now it is completely electronically. So we have records that go back to addresses for 50 years. So we do have the records to see if they met the reasonably fire safe requirements, and then we can look at where we're at today. So one thing that we also do, we try to be very proactive and when we want brush clearance to happen, because we don't want people to do it twice when Mother Nature throws us a curveball with rain. So once again, yes, we do have the records, and and it becomes relevant if they're significantly, I guess I'll use the word overachievers on being non-compliant. We go through the process on that. And I will have to say it can seem challenging and slow, and it is challenging and slow.
So this person had a follow-up, and this person is, or the property in question in this particular case is a repeat offender. Is there any specific follow up with repeat offenders?
Yes, there could be. So to answer the question, reach out to the city of Malibu, talk to Chris Broussard. He will contact me. We will get the jurisdictional engine company involved. We'll get our brush clearance unit involved, and we will go and identify the property and see where we're at and what direction we need to take.
Thank you. Next question. What are your thoughts on the local fire brigades that have begun to develop within the community? Follow-up question. Will LA County Fire seek to interface with those local community groups in the future? And are they in the process of doing that already?
That is a great question. So we have been working on this pilot program with the community involvement with the community brigade. So I feel that is highly beneficial. I think it has a lot of positive approach for the community involvement. We have been working together. The community can outreach and work with our stations routinely, but there is a significant amount of organization that is going on that I'm part of the working group with this to present it to our fire chief to get the approval endorsement to look at this pilot program. So I can say, giving the rollout that we are working on, the rules of engagement, if you will, the participation, how it'll roll into the big wildland machine, the all risk machine, the community participation machine. We are working through that right now to be very disciplined on this rollout. So I can say there's a significant amount of talent within the community and within the fire department that are working together to really entertain the validity of the community interaction. I can say in front of all of you, I believe that it has significant value, and we're going to present it for approval, and that's what we're in the process of now.
Thank you. And next we have a question from Scott Dietrich. Scott, you're being asked to unmute.
Thank you, Sarah. Chief, in I think it's May of 2019, after Woolsey, I went to Station 70 with pictures of years of accumulated dead brush, palm fronds, dead trees in the mouth of Las Flores Canyon. Some of it abuts a fence that's right next to a wooden fence right next to a wooden house. I brought it to City Council. Jerry Vandermeulen came and looked. Paul Grisanti, our mayor, came and looked, our mayor now. And I know Rob DeBose worked on it, but it's still there. And I know you're aware of it. What can we do? If that continues and an ember jumps from a fast moving fire, it could block access for both evacuees and first responders trying to get out of Las Flores or Rambla.
Okay, so anytime you have an accumulation of wooded material, regardless if it's lumber, old brush, palm fronds, or whatever it is, creates challenges. So I personally am not aware of that. It doesn't mean I don't want to be made aware of that. I do. So what we need to do is look at what the best direction is on, first of all, whose property in it is it, who's responsible for the removal, who owns the property, and then we have to look for the responsible party and then look for the correct or course of action. So is it within the city of Malibu city limits? Is a question to you.
Hang on, Chief.
It is But
There we go.
it is, but from what I understand, it's multi-jurisdictional. But it is certainly within the city.
Okay, so I'm gonna put another project for Chris and I to do. So that'll be something that Chris and I will tackle, and we'll see what direction we need to go with it.
Thank you. I will send him photos.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to address a question that's coming up in the chat. For those who are putting addresses in the chat and specific locations, the chat will be saved after the Zoom is closed. I will pull those particular addresses and sites out of the chat and send those over to our fire safety liaison, Chris Brassard and Gabriel Echeverry, and the LA County Fire Department. Another question, about how long does it take after a violation has been filed before enforcement and clearing happens? This particular case was reported prior to the Woolsey fire and the property burned down. And this particular person is very concerned about the fire hazard the property poses right now.
Right. So this is all, well, a couple things with this. So the process, it varies. I don't control the process once it leaves the fire department, either being compliant or non-compliant. That falls within county ag. And then they control how that gets cleared. So I can't tell you a time frame on that. The only thing I can tell you is once it's out of our hands, it's turned over to county ag, they take control of that. One thing I'd like to add with these comments, this is one of the benefits of the community brigade concept, is a community involvement for these type of pre-fire settings, for the education, the outreach, the information sharing, doing what's right for the environmental side of the house, for the protection of property side of the house, and the life safety side of the house. I just want, these are great questions that couples into the brigade concept.
Thank you. Next question is a two-parter. Given that most of the fires that are a direct result of human activity, and most of those are related to illegal fires like in homeless encampments, what is being done to prevent the fires from being started in the first place?
Ooh, that's a big one. So we work with, well, I'll start with us. Los Angeles County Fire Department has a significant outreach. As you know, we're in the community all the time. The human interaction within the wildlands with people that want to live there, a lot of times we don't see them. They're transient in nature and they don't want to be found. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has done a significant job on outreach through the host to accommodate these people that are living in the wildlands, and let's just say living off the grid. And a significant amount of them that we've dealt with and the sheriffs have dealt with, they want to live there, and it's very challenging for us. So we have maps that have been made to where we know the potential is that they're there, and we have to then look at where the fire is at in relationship to where we know we have that activity going on. So we have a life safety component. It is very challenging for your fire department and your sheriff's department to deal with this element. And we know that that threat is there. We know that that same threat on accidental, and somebody in that question mentioned it, because it takes some type of human intervention to happen, whether it's malicious or accidental. That's the fire regime we live in. Those are the fires associated within the area, are not Mother Nature caused during the fall type of season. It's because of that human interaction, that human element that's out there. So I can say that what we're doing about it is when our engine companies are out there, and we're faced with a number of the small fires that you all know that we've had, we call law enforcement to get the appropriate resources needed for that person to get accommodated other than living in the wildlands.
Thank you, Chief. Our next question regards the response to a wildfire. I'm going to shorten it a bit. During a wildfire, when other fire crews come from other parts of California or the country, they're often using their GPS to get directions. However, in Malibu's canyons, GPS doesn't usually work. In the future, how can these outside crews that help fight fires in Malibu be informed prior to arriving?
Okay, so for one, there's been a significant amount of technology that's gone on. So this is year 33 for me. And when I started, it was a 7.5 minute quadrangle map, forest map that we use. And you had to really know where you're at and how to read a map. Now the technology that we have significantly enhances our ability to maneuver. Your Los Angeles County Fire Department has a robust mapping program that's downloadable through a QR code. We can send it to assisting agencies, as they're called, for the different areas that they're going to be going into. But you have to remember, when we have a significant, if you want to go to the Woolsey fire, when you have or you can go to the Old Topanga fire, you can go to the Calabasas fire, you can go to the 78 Canaan fire. I'm just saying that because I see Chris Frost. The 78 Canaan fire, those fires move very rapidly. We need to put people in areas of engagement as quick as we can, and they're going to take the best, and I'll say it, dangerous actions the safest way possible to engage. There is no clean-cut way to have every person know every street, but I can tell you this, if there's a level of engagement that we can take when we have all the resources which are called for immediate need, as it's called. A planned need is when we need people to show up the incident command post. We give them a briefing at 7 in the morning and we send them out to their line assignment by 7:30 to 8 o'clock to get the work done. When we have a rapidly expanding fire environment, those resources come in, they take direction on the radio, they have their own mapping programs that are done, and the mapping programs through what the industry standard is a Venza that the agencies use, whether you come from San Jose fire, San Francisco fire, Modesto fire, has mapping programs so you can work with moving maps. It shows the landscape. We also, and I say your Los Angeles County Fire Department can give them the maps that we're using with a click of a mouse. But when you have resources that are coming in that expanding fire environment, we are in life safety mode. We are in property conservation mode. We are taking those quick actions. So it's not as clean and easy when those people come in from far distances, the organization behind giving them a briefing with map packages are well-defined and well-vetted, and they're using the maps with great technology of today. We're not using these little handheld Garmins. We have iPads. They have Toughbook tablets. So it's very sophisticated now to make us highly successful for what we got to do. But just because we have that technology does not mean that your firefighters can go into that fire environment. That fire environment is very challenging. You could be obstructed by smoke, you can't see the road, you can have significant rock that comes down, you could be challenged with fire that exhibits temperatures exceeding 1200 degrees. So there's a lot of different dynamics, but on the technology side of the house, that is in place, and we've been using it for quite a few years, and it's advancing, and we're staying on top of it as we go through new technologies every, what I'll say, fire season. I know that was a long answer.
Thank you. No, I think you addressed it well. The next question is regarding a new bill that was recently signed by Governor Newsom that potentially deals specifically with fire issues, specifically prescribed burns. Do you know yet how and if this will impact LA County?
So anything that the state hands down, yes, affects LA County. So we have our local government property, we have our state responsibility, we have our federal responsibility areas. So I'll talk to this on prescribed fire, but prescribed fire is not the only answer. We have to look at 3 different ways that we want to mimic Mother Nature's fire regime through organized and efficient, mindful land management. And there's only 3 ways to do that. And we have to look at making a sustainable environment for habitat, for the people that live there, for people that want to recreate there. And so Mother Nature's fire frequency has been significantly altered since we populated the Santa Monica Mountains. So how is this done? Well, I can say if you go back in history before we all lived here, and I live within the Santa Monica Mountain Range, we didn't have that many large fires in the fall because you didn't have Mother Nature that promulgated a natural occurrence when your fuels were at the most critical they could ever have, with the largest winds that come over the landscape, with no natural fire occurrence to happen to be triggered by lightning. That fire frequency in the fall wasn't as it is today because of that human intervention. So prescribed fire is one application, and we put a lot of science on its application. The next is land mammal use, which is goats. And the next is mechanical modification. And within those 3 elements, there's a time and place for each one of those based upon the fuel type, the terrain, any of the environmental conditions, or any of the CEQA that needs to go on with the let's just use environmental review. There is an application for all 3 at times, but there's a lot of areas where all 3 of those are not applicable because there's other sensitive issues that we may need to deal with. But I can tell you this: the more mature that the vegetation that we have within the Santa Monica Mountains in the absence of fire, the more heat energy under Mother Nature's extreme conditions to support that large fire growth gives us significant amount of challenges because of the heat energy that comes out of the fuel bed. So if you want to look and do any research and data, the amount of fire frequency that happens in the Santa Monica Mountains, yes, has significantly challenged the native vegetation and in its cycle, as cited as like in the Chaparral Institute, which I believe in the research that they're doing, because it plays a role with the amount of fire frequency that you have. However, when you have older, mature vegetation that puts out that much heat energy, it is very challenging for the amount of air tankers that we have, the amount of bulldozers that we have, amount of helicopters that we have, hand crews and engine companies, because the energy release that's coming out of that fuel bed and the fire environment it creates a different challenge significantly than if we have the same fire at the same point at the same time in an age class of fuel that's only 5 years old compared to something that's 35 to 40 years old, because the amount of tons per acre, the density of the vegetation, and when we are into these fall months, exhibit the most extreme challenges for combating that fire because of the energy release that comes out of the fuel bed.
Thank you, Chief. The next question we have is very direct. I feel like it might have been referencing something earlier on in the conversation, potentially the mapping question, but are you using drones? That I assume that's on the wildfire.
Yes, we do drones. However, they have a time and place. So meaning that we cannot fly the drones when we're using fixed wing aircraft and helicopters. They don't mix. Do we have areas of the fire that we can use drones? And the answer is yes, but it's all orchestrated through the air operations component on a wildland fire. So I can tell you this, I haven't been on a fire in the last 5 years that we haven't had to shut down all of our aircraft because we've had the public flying drones within our airspace, and we have to cycle everybody out because we can't have that. So do we use drones? Yes. We also use other technology for mapping that we use with a helicopter and also fixed wing aircraft that works at 10,000 feet and above the fire, to use a very, very fine technology to give us the spread, the fire line, the mapping components that can be downlinked to the incident command post to help set the tactical stage and plan for that fire.
Thank you, Chief. The next question is regarding fire weather conditions. It's kind of a two-part question. Cigarette butts have come up a lot in reference to fire concerns. Is that something you see often or as a mission for a wildfire?
On the fires that we've had recently, it always plays a role, but we haven't had a determination of cause recently that I've seen it's caused by a cigarette. So if you have a cigarette that's discarded, and it's a day like today where relative humidities are at 70% or better, it's going into nighttime, that cigarette that's in the grass isn't going to do much because of the moisture of extinction, it's called, in that grass. However, that same cigarette at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in direct sunlight could have significant effects. That's why there's no smoking signs throughout the Santa Monica Mountains because of the wildfire threat. So we are cognizant of it, but I don't have anything reported recently that I know of that has been caused from a cigarette butt, but it's always a concern.
Thank you. The next part of the question is regarding red flag fire days and potential closing of the Santa Monica parks and mountain areas, like was recently done with the Los Padres forest and San Bernardino forest, where they closed down for a while due to fire hazards.
Correct. Okay, so the answer is yes, could we? And we evaluate that, just like they have forest closures due to high risk days. So is there a potential that it could happen? There is a potential it could happen for outdoor recreation. There is a potential that that can happen. It happens on federal lands. As we know, within the Santa Monica Mountains, we have portions of the National Park Service, MRCA, state parks, city parks, and unincorporated county portions that go through that. So could there be something that we do implement a outdoor closure? There could be, but we haven't discussed if that's going to happen, but it could happen on red flag days because it keeps everybody out for our most vulnerable time for that human interaction to potentially accidentally cause a fire or maliciously cause a fire. So that could happen, but it hasn't been a topic of discussion that we're going to do it on certain days at this point.
Thank you, Chief. Next question is more towards fuel moisture, it sounds like.
Ooh.
So to quote this one exactly, it sounds like you are saying that mitigating sun and heat and sun/heat and consequent plant drying by increasing shade and plant moisture will help reduce flammability and fire spread. Is that correct?
That is a somewhat valid statement. Yes. So the vulnerability of sunlit fuels compared to shaded fuels are different because the fuels are a reactive element in its fuel flammability. So your Los Angeles County Fire Department isn't going to get a 38-mile wide easy up and put it over the Santa Monica Mountains. I can tell you that, to provide shade. But on those shady days, we have less vulnerability than if we have complete sunlight days. So that is actually a valid statement. Yes.
Thank you, Chief. Regarding the drones and grounding of aircrafts, what can residents do to support fire services, and how are offenders cited, and how does that citation sourcing work?
So if we know that we have a drone in the area, it is communicated, the aircraft cycle out, and then we have law enforcement, or we put an aircraft at a distance and hopefully find where that person, but law enforcement is notified, and yes, it is cited. And what the level of that citation is, I do not know that answer, but I know that we do have, once again, quite frequently do have drone within the operational area, which significantly challenges us. And so going into the community brigade, that's a great community component to educating your residents and the people you interact with as an ambassador, if you will, for your community in wildfire preparedness.
Thank you, Chief. This is the last question we have at the moment. I'm going to read this one directly. After Woolsey, we requested a fire department turnaround sign that we have wanted to post on our property with a circular turnaround. I have made several calls to the county, but never got a direct reply on who we need to contact. Please advise.
Okay, so I guess I would have to, that the person who's asking the question needs to reach out to Megan, and then we will look at what we need to do for a turnaround sign or whatever it is. We have to look at, is it a private road? Is it a public road, or what it is, to make sure that there's some validity to what we want to do. So if it's with going to be best for what is suited, we will be glad to go look at getting that done. So Megan Curry will be your point of contact, and we will vet what needs to happen to make sure that it meets the needs, so we can identify what we can do.
And I just dropped my email into the chat. So if anyone has anything they want to contact me with, that's my email address.
Thank you, Chief. Next question. If you're trying to mimic nature, when there was, then the frequency would be between 30 and 100 years, not 5. Oh, sorry, let me get to the question bit. Can you clarify your recommendation for the removal of mature chaparral, sorry about that, with increased flammability of invasive replacements? So why remove mature oh my goodness, chaparral when you can remove invasive plants instead?
Okay, so I'm not saying, once again, remove the mature chaparral. I'm trying to give you a representation of Mother Nature's fire regime and what happens. I'm trying to state that there is a significant difference in mature chaparral in fire intensity compared to 5-year-old fuels, compared to 30-year-old fuels. The intensity that comes out of that fuel bed is significant. So there's ways that you can actually leave a significant amount of the mature chaparral and take out 100% of the dead component and leave 70% of the live component on prescribed fire. There's ways that you can thin to leave the main integrity of that mature chaparral and take out the dead wood, so it has the ability to potentially flourish a lot better and stay in that native state rather than all the dead wood accumulation. I'm losing my light here and I don't know why this is happening. So sorry about that. So with that, we can do prescribed fire. We can do mechanical modification. There's a significant amount of science that goes into it. And I won't challenge the environmental side of the house with it because I believe in it. There's an application that we all have to be sensitive to have the correct amount of resource management for sustainability of our wildlands. So Mother Nature and wildfire does play a role in our ecosystem. So we have to be sensitive to look at all of us working together to look at these alternatives, because we know what the end result is. The end result is we have hundreds of thousands of acres that are burned under conditions that are unfavorable to support the firefighting mission. So we have to look at these alternatives to be environmentally sound in what we're doing for habitat, working from the wildlands towards the homes. And then also with home hardening. This is such a huge topic on what we can do as firefighters and as the communities that we serve to work together for the best outcomes that we can have through safe and effective environmentally sensitive practices. So there's a significant amount of science behind prescribed fire, mechanical modification, and land mammal use. And there's a significant amount of science behind mature chaparral beds and how they're suffering because of the frequency of fire. So we all have to look at what are we willing to accept and what are we all willing to lose, and where's that happy medium to bring that together for those three components, which is environmental component, which is for the property component, but ultimately the life safety component of us all. So I know that was long with the whole prescribed fire thing is one of my other areas that I work within at the local level, state and national level. And so there's a right application for it at the right time under the right conditions. And there's a lot of times that there's not. We just have to see what the best fit is, what type of approach that we want to take.
Thank you, Chief. Next question is, I'll read this one directly as well. There's a huge fuel load between Stunt Road and the Malibu boundary. Any plans on reducing this?
The Stunt Road, that's right below, right by our Camp 8. So we don't have anything right now that is on the books for that area, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that we can't entertain what that may look like. So there is no plans for that at this point in time. So that goes through a process to see what we could potentially do, but it's based upon land ownership and how we can manage that. So I don't have anything for that area now, But if you have that area of concern, send that information to Megan, and we have to look at who owns the property and what we could potentially do for that.
Thank you, Chief. Looks like that's all of our questions at this time. Again, if you guys have any questions, please either raise your hand and I will unmute you, or go ahead and type it in the chat and I will ask it on your behalf. We have another question from Scott Dietrich and followed by Chris Frost. We'll go to Scott Dietrich first.
Thank you. Chief, after L County does brush inspections in the spring, if you guys could leave, I don't know, a note in people's mailbox or however you do it, pin it up on their gate or whatever, that says for a subsequent home hardening inspection, please contact Chris Broussard. I'll throw it to him. Free, absolutely free for anybody in 90265. Because what we found is a lot of people think, oh no, I had the fire inspection, not realizing they're two separate things, in spite of all the effort Sarah and Susan have put in to try to encourage that.
Right. So that's a great one, because we're actually working on that, because there's a couple different elements that come into play with our brush inspections. And so that home hardening and public education, the public information component is all getting coupled together. So we give the homeowner, if you will, the required information for them to be successful at the home. So knowing what they can do. That's why we do our fire safety days. That's why we do all this interaction with everybody, because we believe in it, because we're here to protect you. And that you is your life, your property, and things that are important to you. So that information and how that's going to happen and the rollout with that is ongoing right now. And we're having great traction with that, and great feedback from the community on the involvement. And Chris Broussard probably can give you a number off the top of his head how many people have contacted him. He's gone out and he's done walkthroughs on the home. In fact, him and I just did one together about I'll say it was 2 weeks ago. It might have been 3 weeks ago when we just did one. We got great feedback from the homeowner.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay, next is Chris Frost.
Good evening, Drew. First, I want to thank you for the information that you brought to the city, to the residents tonight, and everybody on here. I would like to see triple the amount of people listening to this, because I think the information that you brought makes it real clear to everyone what LA County Fire Department is capable of doing and does do on a daily basis. I do have a question in here as well. Could you speak a little bit about how you feel the role of Arson Watch here in Malibu, what you feel their role is, and how important it is?
Yes, sir. So thank you for the kind words. And your fire department works every day to make it better for all of us. So Arson Watch. Arson Watch is a huge component. We have great interaction with them. When we know that we're going to use our Arson Watch on high-risk days, it's coordinated. We talk to the sheriff, we talk to the watch commander, we talk to Lost Hill Sheriff, and we actively patrol. We look at the areas that we'd like to patrol, and that is of huge value for early warning. We need that early warning mechanism, and that's where Arson Watch comes into play for one, early warning, or potentially knowing the determination of cause of what caused the fire. So the interaction we have with Arson Watch is phenomenal, and I encourage people to be part of that.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you, Chief. I'm actually going to take a quick side detour and introduce Chris Broussard, who is our fire safety liaison. I've put the link to the home hardening appointment book. So all you have to, in the chat, all you have to do is click on that link and you can directly book an appointment with Chris Broussard or Gabriel Echeverry. So Chris.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Chief. I'm having some technical difficulties with my camera tonight. I just wanted to let everyone know that, as Chief Smith said, home hardening and the home ignition zone assessment, it is a free service provided to you by the city of Malibu for the residents of Malibu and unincorporated that surrounds Malibu. All you have to do to book a home ignition zone assessment is go to malibucity.org/fire safety. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the tab, book a home ignition zone assessment. Myself and the other fire liaison, or the other fire liaison, Gabe, will come out and we will walk your property. We will look at your house, look at your landscaping, and we will give you a good, thorough, detailed report and make a lot of suggestions. As Chief Smith said, about 2 weeks ago, we spent about 2 hours walking a community, and it was great. Met with several homeowners, made some really solid recommendations, and they're going to move forward with that. So again, it's free. Please sign up, take advantage of it. It's no obligation. There's straight recommendations to harden your home, and it's malibucity.org/fire safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So we're getting more questions about closing specific roadside lookouts, parking lots, trailheads on specific locations. This person in particular is concerned about Piuma Road during red flag days. And I know you've addressed this already, but what about a smaller subset of closures rather than just Santa Monica Mountains wide?
That's a tough one. I don't recall the last time that we've done that. And if somebody does remember, please speak up and let me know. Is it an option? It could be an option, but I don't see that with the amount of our firefighters being out when we have high risk days. We have our law enforcement partners that are out on high risk days, and we have our Arson Watch on high risk days. Because I truly believe people are out there are doing good things, and sometimes they are faced with some bad circumstances and accidents happen. That's the early warning component. The things that we want to target is the malicious folks that are out there that want to do harm. And so that plays a role. By closing, doing any closures, that eliminates people being in certain areas for all use, whatever it is. So, but there's significant impacts. Do you leave it open to residents only? It's just so many challenges with that. So I cannot give you a specific answer at all, because I'm not faced with that challenge right now. If we need to close a certain area of Piuma, and we know from Las Virgenes Road, basically to Topanga Canyon to from Las Virgenes Road east on Mulholland to Topanga Canyon, that whole piece is what's left within the Santa Monica Mountains before you get to the portions of the Palisades. And so I know that gives us some significant vulnerabilities to promote that large wildland growth on those high risk days. But I can't sit here and tell you that we're going to do that closure at all, if it's going to happen. I think it's going to be done through active patrolling and through the Arson Watch, the fire department, and law enforcement.
Thank you. Next question we have is there any concern about repeated water failure? Repeated failure of the water shutdown in the Latino pump?
In Latigo, okay.
Oh,
So-
Latigo. Thank you.
Latigo. So I can say that we work with our water partners routinely, and they want to do what's best to give us the best service delivery for water supply systems for us to combat fires. So is there potential that we could have a failure in the water supply system? Yes, based upon where you're at. And if we have electrical power that goes down that doesn't feed the pumps, that sends the water and travels it through certain areas, yes, but there was a lot of areas that we did have water. And I'll speak to the Woolsey, we did have water. There's a lot of areas that we didn't have water based upon the systems and how they're set up. If you have a tank that's at the top of the hill, mountain range, and it's flowing everything downhill to hydrants, we're gonna have water pressure and water supply. If it has to go from the coastal side and be pumped up to a different location, we're gonna have some significant challenges. But we work with Las Virgenes quite frequently, and we work with District 29 quite frequently. And Dave Ryman is actually one of our advocates, and they've installed X amount of pumps and also portable generators to try to eliminate any of those failures that happen in the systems. So I could say that the utility agencies are being very proactive with us on what they want to do to help us so we have the water delivery to combat a fire.
Thank you, Chief. Follow-up question to that. Is there anything that residents could do to ensure water availability during a fire? Or what should residents do to preserve water availability and water pressure?
So the hydrants, the residents can't really do anything. I can tell you the simplest thing residents can do is if the hydrant is around their property, make it clear that we can see it and don't park in front of it. I don't know if it's fortunate, but there's a lot when I drive around, a lot of people within the Santa Monica Mountains that park right in front of the fire hydrants because it's the only place to park. So I can say the easiest thing, what can you do is don't park in front of the fire hydrants. And then if it's within your yard or there, if you wouldn't mind, take a little ownership in it and clear around it so we know that it's there. That would really significantly help us. If you have a pool, you have a drafting type of system that has an outlet for us to use, make sure that it's identified. Make sure that there's a sign on it that says that it goes to a pool that has a X gallon water supply to it. Because there's a lot of times that we'll go to different areas that have pool systems in place, but we can't see them because they're not identified or maintained, or we have no idea what it does. Because there's a significant difference if it goes to a 20,000 gallon steel tank compared to if it goes to a pool. There's differences there in what water we have or how we're actually going to get the water from that. Because if we hook up our fire engine to a steel tank that has a closed lid, we can actually collapse it through the suction of our fire truck. If you have a pool that has an open top to it, basically, because it's a pool, we can use that water out of it. So if you have water available and you've put in a system, make sure that it's clear, that it's identified, that we can see. Because in a rapidly expanding firefight, we're going to go with the known. And if it's unknown, we're not going to take our time to try to figure it out, because it could be a failure, meaning that we wasted time trying to make something work that it doesn't work.
Thank you, Chief. Looks like that's it for our questions. Again, if you guys have any remaining questions, please type them in the chat or, excuse me, or raise your hand and I will unmute you. For those who have been taking notes, I will send out a follow-up email that includes all the links that we shared and a link to the recording of this presentation. That will be sent either on Monday or tomorrow. Again, if you guys have any questions, please type them in the chat and we'll get them answered for you. So Chief, we have one person who's asking for the scientific documentation on chaparral, and she provided her email. So I can send it to her.
Okay, so we can manage that through Megan, because I'd have to look exactly what kind of, there's a lot there. I can give it on both sides on what's good, and so there's a lot of science behind it. So I'd actually need some direction on what type of science. But we can look at the question and give the appropriate response based upon the question.
Thank you, Chief. To the person who typed that question in, or that comment in, I should say, thank you. And any other guidance you can provide to Megan and Chief Smith would be much appreciated.
Yes.
We'll give it another minute for any other questions. Again, I will be sending out a follow-up email with the links provided in this meeting, along with some additional resources. I don't see any new questions and I see no hands. So I will take this time to say thank you, Chief. Thank you for your time tonight. Thank you, Megan. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the night.
Thank you. And please reach out to us if you have any questions or something that's stimulated after this is over. Please reach out to myself or Megan, and we can give you the direction needed.
Thank you so much, Chief. I hope you have an excellent rest of your night. Thank you, everyone. I will be ending the meeting for everyone. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.